Hey, this is Greg from GMH Audio, and I want to show you how I record guitar. There's a lot of musicians right now whose plans are getting disrupted. You can't go into the studio to record things you were planning on doing. And I wanted to show you, if you're stuck at home, if you're going to record yourself and try and keep making music, and especially if you're going to be sending those recordings out to be mixed by someone else, the best way to do it, in my opinion, and my workflow for recording guitars, how to make sure that you get them as good as possible. Before you even get started recording, there's a couple preparation things you want to do. Make sure your guitar is set up. You want to make sure you have new strings on there, fresh new strings. Month old, 2 weeks old is not new. New is new. You'll get more tone, more high end, more low end, more articulation. You'll get more sustain. You'll have better tuning stability. Change your damn strings. That goes for bass players as well. Yes, even you. As far as tuning, make sure you're constantly in tune. Check your tuning often. Check your intonation. I made a whole video about tuning if you want to look at that, but you want to be super consistent and in tune for the entire recording, especially because we're going to be double tracking pretty much everything. I want to talk briefly about my setup. I've got my amp set up behind me. I'm using my JCM 2000 Marshall. I'm running a East River Drive overdrive from Electro Harmonics into the front end of that. And I'm using an orange 2x12 cabinet with an Audix D4 mic. I didn't really focus on tone or spend a lot of time dialing it in. This is just a combination that I know works pretty well. This video is not about guitar tone. I could do a whole nother thing about that. I just wanted to get something basic. Use whatever you have, but this is really important. I also have a DI box splitting off a totally clean signal right out of the guitar, also into Pro Tools. I'm recording these on two separate tracks that are grouped, so whatever happens to one happens to the other, and I have a DI and an amp track for every single performance. You need the DI. It's super important. Not only is it good to have it as a safety net if you want to reamp your tone later, it's also great for visually looking at the recording, and I'll show you that once we're actually in it later. Great for making editing so much easier, stuff like that. And I'll show you that once we're actually recording the part. If you're in a situation where for whatever reason you don't have a DI box or any way to split a clean DI straight off the guitar and also record the amp at the same time, I would not skip the DI. I'd skip the amp. I'd still keep the DI. Most interfaces you could plug right into, pull up an amp sim and just use a DI. A DI is more valuable than an amp track, especially if you're recording at home in a less than ideal environment. You might not be able to get the perfect ultimate guitar tone dialed in. You might not even be able to hear really well what that is if you don't have the amp isolated in another space. Just get the DI. You'll be able to reamp it later. Maybe if you're sending it off to be mixed, that producer will be able to reamp it through a selection of his amps. Even amp sims are getting really good and they can sound awesome. I think you're better off just doing the DI than worrying about miking up an amp in a less than ideal situation if you had to pick one. I personally like to record both. I like to try and get a cool tone on an amp and roll with that, but I have the DI for a fallback if for whatever reason that doesn't work out and I need to reamp. And also, as I'll show you, the visual aid is beyond valuable. This also applies if you're using some sort of physical modeler like an Axe-Fx or a pod or some pedal that you use to get your guitar tone. Just because you're plugging that direct in does not make it a DI. That's still what I would call the amp sound. And you still want to have that plus a totally clean DI that's just nothing but the raw guitar. All right, let's pop into Pro Tools and I'll show you how I have that set up. Here's my Pro Tools session. I've got 6 guitar tracks here that I'm going to be using. The reason that there's 6, there's 2 for every track, a DI and an amp. These are grouped together, so they act as one. And I have a left, a right, and a center, which is in playlist mode, which is how Pro Tools handles takes. Your DAW might do it a little differently, but this is the one I'm actually going to record onto. And these are my double tracks that I'm going to use. So I made up a little riff for this. I'll just record a pass of that real quickly. Sorry if I mess up, but I'll just show you what I have. there's the part. Here I have my amp and my DI. The DI is on top. Here's what just the raw DI sounds like. And I'm just keeping that muted. That's just there for later if I need it. And here's the amp track. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I was happy with that take. I'm going to take this, and I like to drag it down onto a new playlist just to keep track of my takes. And I do another take. Make sure the Met's on. All right, I just did a little bit there. I want to show you a couple more things. You'll notice that I'm not using a count in. Instead, I'm just giving myself 2 bars at the beginning rather than doing like this count off with 2 bars. I hate the count off in every DAW. Don't use it. Just give yourself some space at the beginning, and I'll show you exactly why. So here's this part I recorded. If instead I did a count off and tried to come in right here, that little bit at the beginning is gone. And God forbid you were a little early, right? If you came in a little early on that chord, now you just chopped off the beginning of that chord, never to get it back. If you give yourself the space and record that, then you have that to get back. And this applies to every instrument. It's a pet peeve of mine. If I get tracks and they start at bar 1 and the beginnings of notes are cut off, you can never get those back. So just give yourself some space at the beginning. You know, you could always chop it off later when you export the song, just so it starts right at the beginning. But give yourself that time so you have some wiggle room there. Something else that I'm looking for when I'm recording, especially a part like this with palm muting, I'm looking for consistency on the palm mutes. I'm looking for strong hits. You can see right here, maybe this was a little weak and these were a little better. Something really easy to tell on the DI. And that's what I'm talking about with the visual. I'm going to put it on this track so you're not getting confused by those. Here's the DI and here's the amp, right? If you look at this, it's so easy to see every single note I played. Look at this. Where's the beginning of this note if you only had this track to go? You'd never, ever know. So just glancing at this, I could already see there's some issues with the consistency over here. I can already see there's some give and take rhythmically, looking at the bar line, and I can know that that's stuff I need to work on to get the best possible performance I can for this part. DIs are amazing. They're not just for amp sims anymore. They're great, and you want to always take one. All right. Now let's record double tracks for this part, and I'll show you how that sounds. Remember to record enable your tracks, boys and girls, and turn on the metronome. All right, I messed up at the beginning. Other than that, I was pretty happy with it. I'm going to pop this onto this other track, and I'm going to show you how I'd punch in a section. This is one of the reasons I like to have a separate track to track onto. So I can look at the DI right here, and I know I messed up this ending. Gross. So I'm just going to chop off all of that. And I'm going to go in here, go a couple bars back, just come back in. I'll play along with myself a little bit before it comes in, and that'll help get a smooth little edit when I splice these two together. Much better. So now I go down here, I'm looking at my DI. I can tell that this chord starts right around here. Pop that right up, give a little crossfade. Great. So now let's track a double to that. When I'm tracking doubles, I usually like to turn up the monitoring track that's in the center just a little bit, just so I can focus on the part I'm currently playing and have the other one in the background. I'm also going to put this one on the left track just because I prefer it. Messed up. I'm just going to do it again. It was okay, not the best. Maybe some of that's usable. I'm just going to pop it down to another playlist. Keep moving on. By the time I'm done doing a song like this, I'll have a whole rainbow of different playlists of different takes. And if I need just to fix like a little bit, say I didn't like the very beginning of that, I could just grab it from over here. Whoops. Pull that up. And there you go. That's why I like to keep unused takes on hand, just in case I might need them later for something. Not bad. I'm definitely hearing some looseness over here, and I can see just visually in this top take, I was rushing those just a tad, whereas these were pretty much right in line. So I'm going to redo just the beginning of this. So I'm going to chop off the beginning there. And just do one more take. There you go. I left a little bit of overlap there. Move these down, and I'm going to pop these just right up there. I'm going to find a good place right before a note to make my cut. Let's see, how about right there? A little bit where I wasn't playing anything. I like to try and find these little bits of quiet in between notes and do the fade there, and it's usually totally invisible. For the sake of this, we'll say that's good enough. I'm going to chop off this noise at the beginning. Give a little crossfade, tiniest ever amount that I can. Same thing at the end. Anyway, there you go. There's definitely still some room for improvement on there. I wouldn't stop there if I was actually doing this for a record, but for the sake of seeing the example and the workflow, I think that demonstrates it pretty well. Hope this was useful. Hope you got something out of this. Let me know if there's something that you saw in here that you didn't know about or that you weren't doing. And good luck recording.